The coffee was still hot when Jacob saw the blood, not his blood that would have made sense. A man living alone in the Arizona Territory learned to expect his own injuries, the split knuckles from mending fence, the gash from a slipped axe, the constant small betrayals of flesh against this unforgiving land. But this blood wasn't his. It streaked across his porch boards in a wavering line, dark as molasses in the pre-dawn light, leading from the steps toward his door, fresh enough to gleam wet where the lamplight caught it. Jacob set down his tin cup slowly, his other hand already moving to the Winchester propped against the doorframe. 3 years of solitude had taught him the rhythms of this place, every cricket's pause, every shift in the wind through the canyon. This morning, something had broken that rhythm, and now he knew what. The blood trail grew thicker near the woodpile. His split juniper lay scattered, knocked aside by something or someone dragging themselves forward. A handprint marked the stack's edge, fingers splayed wide in desperate grip, the palm's center deep red. "Christ," he muttered, then caught himself. Speaking aloud had become a bad habit lately. Conversations with no one that Otto the merchant had started noticing on his supply runs. "You're getting strange out here, Jacob, talking to the wind like it might answer back." Another handprint lower, as if whoever left it had fallen to their knees. The trail curved around the cabin's corner toward the back, where he kept the rain barrels. Jacob followed, rifle raised but held loose. Whoever had bled this much wasn't likely in shape for ambush. He found her collapsed against the barrel's base, one arm still reaching up as if she'd tried to drink but couldn't manage the height. Apache. By the beadwork on what remained of her torn dress, young, maybe 25, though blood and dirt made it hard to tell, the kind of deep knife wounds across her shoulder and ribs that meant someone had taken their time. She was breathing, barely a thin wheeze that bubbled red at the corner of her mouth, but breathing. Jacob stood there longer than he should have, rifle still raised, watching that labored rise and fall of her chest. The smart thing would be to walk away. Let the desert take what the desert had already claimed. He'd made himself a promise after Mary died, after he'd failed to save the one person who'd mattered. No more connections, no more trying, no more failing anyone again. The woman's eyes opened, not all the way. Just slits of dark awareness in that battered face. She tried to speak, managed only a wet cough that brought more blood. Her hand moved not toward him, not pleading, but reaching into the folds of her dress with the last determination of the dying. "Don't," Jacob said, but she wasn't reaching for a weapon. She pulled out something small, wrapped in oilcloth, held it toward him with a trembling hand that cost her everything to lift. When he didn't move to take it, she let it fall into the dirt between them. Her strength gone, her eyes closed again. The morning wind picked at the oilcloth's edge, starting to unwrap it. Jacob saw the corner of something pale paper, maybe, or photograph. The woman's breathing grew shallower, each exhale smaller than the last. He should leave it, leave her. This wasn't his concern, but his hand was already reaching down, picking up the small buttonle before the wind could scatter whatever secret she'd carried here to die with. The oilcloth fell away. Inside was a piece of yellowed paper, folded, small, water-stained, but readable, and a photograph, one of those expensive tintypes from back east. The image stopped him cold. It was his wife, Mary, standing next to a woman who looked exactly like the dying Apache at his feet, except healthy, smiling, both of them in their Sunday best outside a building he recognized with a sick lurch of his stomach, the missionary school in Tucson, the place Mary had volunteered before the war, before their marriage, before everything went to hell. At the bottom of the photograph, In Mary's careful script, Sisters in Christ, Mary and Anna Morningstar, 1802, Jacob's hands started shaking. He unfolded the paper, found more of Mary's handwriting, a letter dated 3 months before she died. My dearest Anna, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I am gone. Please find my husband, Jacob. The war has broken him, but he is a good man. He will need... The letter tore off there, the bottom half missing, lost to water or time or violence. But at the very bottom, barely visible, Mary had written an address, his address, this cabin that no one was supposed to know about, where he'd come to disappear. The Apache woman, Anna Morningstar, made a sound, not quite a word, more a recognition. Her eyes had opened again, fixed on his face with desperate intensity. She knew who he was. Mary, she whispered, blood frothing on her lips. Mary. Sent. Then her head fell forward, and she said nothing more. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Jacob's knees hit the dirt. His fingers found the pulse at her throat, thread thin, skipping beats like a broken telegraph. The photograph lay in the dust between them, Mary's face staring up at the brightening sky. Morningstar's blood had soaked through her dress, pooling dark beneath her ribs. The wounds gaped with each shallow breath. Jacob pressed his palm against the deepest cut. Hot wetness seeped between his fingers. Her eyes fluttered open, focused on him. Her lips moved. Inside, he said. The word came out rough, unused. Gotta get you inside. He slid one arm under her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. She weighed nothing, bird bones and blood loss. Her head lolled against his chest as he stood. The movement tore something loose inside her. Fresh red soaked through his shirt. The 20 feet to his door stretched long. His boots slipped on her blood trail. Her breathing went ragged, stopped, started again with a wet gasp that sprayed crimson across his neck. The morning sun crested the canyon wall, throwing their joined shadow across the threshold. Jacob shouldered through the door, knocked the coffee pot off the table, getting her onto the boards. The letter and photograph were still outside. Later, if there was a later, he cut her dress away with his skinning knife. 3 deep punctures, 1 through the meat of her shoulder, 2 between her ribs, the kind of wounds made slow and deliberate, made to hurt before they killed. Dark bruises mottled her arms, defensive marks from trying to ward off the blade. The water in his wash basin turned red, then redder. He packed the wounds with torn strips of his only clean shirt, tied them tight with the twine meant for hanging meat. She moaned, tried to pull away. He held her down, kept pressure on the worst bleeder below her ribs. Mary, she whispered. Her hand caught his wrist. Mary said, find. Stop talking. She said, you would know what? Her voice faded, but her eyes stayed on his, urgent, trying to communicate something beyond words. Jacob reached for the whiskey bottle, poured it straight onto the wounds. Morningstar's back arched, mouth open in a soundless scream. Then she went limp. He checked her pulse again. Still there, barely. That's when he heard it. Horses, coming fast up the canyon trail. Too many for Otto's wagon. Morningstar's hand tightened on his wrist, weak but insistent. Her eyes held terror now, recognition. They'd followed her. The hoofbeat stopped 50 yards out. Jacob counted 3 horses, maybe 4. Their breathing heavy from the hard ride up the canyon. Morningstar's fingers dug into his forearm, her nails drawing blood through his shirt. How many? Jacob kept his voice low, barely a whisper against her ear. Her lips formed a word, 3. He lifted her from the table, carried her to the corner behind the door, set her down gentle as he could manage against the wall. She bit through her bottom lip to keep from crying out. Fresh blood ran down her chin. Jacob grabbed the Winchester, checked the load. 15 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. His Colt sat in its holster on the peg by the door, too far now. The windows were shuttered, good thick pine. But the door was just planks with a simple bar. "You in there?" The voice carried clear through the morning air. Young, cocky. "We know she went this way. Tracked her blood all night." Jacob said nothing. Moving slow, he eased up to the window, peered through a crack in the shutter. 3 men, like she'd said, all armed, 1 still mounted, the other 2 spreading out to flank the cabin. "She killed Tom Garrett." The voice continued. "Stuck a knife in his belly and run off with his horse. That's murder, mister. We're within our rights." Morning Star shook her head. Violent. Her mouth opened, but only air came out. She pointed to herself, then made a cutting motion across her throat, then pointed outside. They'd tried to kill her first. "I know you're listening," the writer called. "Seen your smoke? Seen fresh coffee grounds out here? You got 5 minutes to send her out, or we come in." Jacob looked back at Morning Star. Her eyes had gone glassy with fever, but she was watching him, waiting to see what kind of man he was, the kind who'd turn her over, or the kind who'd fight 3 men for a stranger. Except she wasn't a stranger, not if Mary's letter meant what he thought it meant. He grabbed the heavy oak table, dragged it against the door. The scraping wood echoed loud in the small cabin. That would be answer enough for the men outside. "Your funeral, friend?" the voice called, then lower, to his companions. "Check around back." Boot steps circled the cabin. Jacob moved to the back window, saw a shadow pass. The man was testing the shutters, looking for weakness. Finding none, Jacob had built this place to last, back when he'd still believed in lasting things. A rifle shot cracked. The front window shutter splintered but held. Another shot, another, walking rounds across the front of the cabin, testing, probing. Morning Star tried to stand. Fell immediately, her legs giving out. The movement tore her wounds open again. Blood ran fresh through the makeshift bandages. She crawled toward him, leaving a red trail across the floor planks. "No!" Jacob moved to push her back down, but she grabbed his shirt, pulled herself up enough to whisper, "They will burn." She was right. 3 men could keep him pinned while they set fire to the walls. The cabin would go up fast in this dry heat. He'd have to come out then, into their guns. More shots. The door shuddered, but held. Jacob heard them talking, too low to make out words, planning something. He looked at Morning Star, at the blood pooling beneath her, at her eyes already starting to dim. She'd be dead within the hour anyway. The smart play was to put her outside, let them take what they came for. He'd tried to help. No one could say he hadn't tried. Mary's photograph lay on the floor where it had fallen from his pocket. His dead wife's face smiled up at him beside this dying woman's younger self. "Sisters in Christ." "Hell," Jacob muttered. He pulled Morning Star to the far corner, propped her sitting against the wall, tore more strips from his shirt, packed them tight against her wounds. Her breathing went shallow, quick little gasps that barely moved her chest. The shooting stopped. Silence stretched out, worse than gunfire. They were moving, planning, getting ready for something. Jacob checked his rifle again, though he knew it was loaded. His hands were steady. They'd been steady at Antietam, too. Right before everything went to hell, a torch crashed through the front window, then another through the back, burning pitch and rags, black smoke already filling the cabin. The dry wood of the floor started to catch. Morning Star's hand found his, squeezed once, weak but deliberate. An apology, maybe, or a goodbye. The smoke thickened. Jacob's eyes streamed. He could hear the men outside, positioned to catch him in crossfire when the heat drove him out. The flames spread across the floor, reaching for the walls. He had maybe 2 minutes before the choice was taken from him. Burn or face their guns. Morning Star wouldn't last either way. That's when he heard it. A fourth horse, coming hard up the trail. The men outside heard it too. Their voices rose in confusion. Who the hell? A rifle cracked. Different sound than before. Heavier caliber. One of the men outside screamed. Another rifle shot. The heavy crack of a Sharps 50 military issue. Jacob knew that sound in his bones. "Federal Marshal," the new voice boomed across the canyon. "Drop your weapons." "This ain't your business, lawman," one of the attackers shouted back. "We're pursuing a murderer, like hell you are." The marshal's voice carried absolute authority. "Seen Tom Garrett's body myself this morning. Man had his pants around his ankles and scratch marks down his back. You boys want to explain what kind of murder that was." Silence except for the flames eating through Jacob's floor. The smoke thickened, black and choking. Morning Star's breathing went ragged. Jacob pulled off his shirt, pressed it over her nose and mouth. The fire had spread to the east wall now, climbing toward the roof beams. "She's a thieving Apache whore." The Sharps roared again. A man screamed, high and terrible. "Next one goes through somebody's skull," the marshal said. "I got 6 more rounds and 3 targets. Feel like testing my arithmetic." Horses wheeling, panicked voices. Jacob grabbed Morning Star under the arms, dragged her toward the door. The table he'd pushed against it was already charring on one side. He kicked it away, lifted the bar. Smoke poured out through the crack. "Wait," the marshal called. "Not yet." 2 horses galloping away, fast. The third man must be down. Jacob's lungs burned. Morning Star had gone completely limp, her weight dead in his arms. The cloth over her face showed no breath movement. "Now," the marshal said. "Come on out." Jacob shouldered through the door into blazing daylight. The smoke followed him out in a black column. He dragged Morning Star clear, laid her flat on the dirt, pressed his ear to her chest. Nothing. Then a faint flutter. "Jesus Christ!" The marshal dismounted. A big man with steel-gray hair and a face carved from granite. "That's Anna Morning Star, Mary Weaver's friend from the mission." Jacob's head snapped up. "You knew my wife, knew her son. I helped her get the teaching position at that Apache school. She wrote me about Anna every month for 2 years. The marshal knelt beside Morning Star, checking her wounds with practiced efficiency. "These boys jumped her at Garrett's trading post. She defended herself. They've been hunting her like an animal for 2 days. One attacker lay face down, 20 feet away, blood pooling from his shoulder. Another clutched his leg, whimpering. Their horses stood nervous by the canyon wall, watching the cabin burn. The marshal pulled a flask from his coat, poured whiskey directly onto Morning Star's wounds. She gasped, eyes flying open, then closed again. But she was breathing steadier now. "Name's Frank Morrison," the marshal said. "Mary wrote me about you, too, after you got back from the war. Said you'd gone dark inside. Said if anything happened to her, I should—" He stopped, studied Jacob's face. "She's been writing Anna since she died. From beyond the grave, you might say." "That's impossible." Morrison reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a leather portfolio. "Mary gave me a stack of letters before the fever took her, dated for different times, asked me to mail them out accordingly. This one, here, was supposed to go to Anna last month." He handed Jacob an envelope. "But Anna never got it, because Garrett wouldn't let her leave his trading post. Had her working off some made-up debt." Jacob's hands shook as he opened the letter. Mary's handwriting, dated 3 years in the future from when she died. My dearest Anna, by now you've received my previous letters. If you're reading this one, then the situation with Mr. Garrett has become unbearable, as I feared it might. Please go to Jacob. He won't want to help. He's built walls around himself that seem unbreakable. But you need each other. He needs someone to remind him how to live. You need someone to keep you safe. The cabin is 15 miles north of Benson, up the Red Rock Canyon. There's always water there, and the walls are thick. The letter went on, detailed directions, descriptions of Jacob's habits, how to approach him without triggering his instinct to run, his dead wife orchestrating their meeting from the grave. She knew, Morrison said. Somehow she knew Anna would need help right about now, and that you'd need saving too, in a different way. At Morning Star stirred, her hand reaching out. Jacob caught it without thinking. Her eyes opened, focused on his face with the recognition that went deeper than their brief meeting. She told me. Morning Star's voice came out cracked, barely audible. In dreams. Mary came, said, find you. The cabin roof collapsed behind them, sending sparks spiraling into the morning sky. Everything Jacob owned was in there, his books, his supplies, 3 years of solitary existence. Gone in minutes, Morrison stood, walked over to the wounded attackers. You boys are under arrest. We'll sort this out proper in Tucson. He glanced back at Jacob. Unless you want to press charges for arson. Jacob looked down at Morning Star, at the letter in his hands, at the smoke rising from his former life. Let them go, he said. Morrison raised an eyebrow. Your choice. But they'll likely come back. No. The wounded man who'd been clutching his leg spoke up. No, we won't. Tom Garrett was my cousin. But what he did, what we did. He looked at Morning Star, something like shame crossing his features. We're done here. Morrison hauled both men to their feet, tied their hands, helped them onto their horses. I'll be back in 3 days with supplies and a doctor. Try to keep her alive until then. He mounted up, leading the attackers' horses, paused at the canyon bend. Oh, and Jacob. There's more letters. Mary left 23 more, all dated different times over the next year. Whatever she was planning, this is just the beginning. The marshal disappeared around the bend, leaving Jacob alone with a dying woman and the smoking ruins of his solitude. Morning Star squeezed his hand. When he looked down, she was studying his face with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through him. Mary said, she whispered, you would fight it. Fight what? But she'd slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving him with the question hanging in the smoke-filled air. Jacob's remaining possessions lay in the dirt, the Winchester, still hot from the fire, Morning Star's blood-soaked dress, and Mary's letters scattered where Morrison had dropped them. The cabin skeleton still burned, roof beams collapsing inward with wet, cracking sounds. Morning Star's breathing had gone shallow again. Each inhale barely lifted her ribs. The bandages he'd tied were soaked through, red, spreading dark across the white cloth. She needed shelter, water, more than he had. The root cellar, he'd dug it into the hillside 50 feet from the cabin, deep enough to stay cool even in July. Jacob gathered Morning Star against his chest. Her head lolled back, exposing the long line of her throat, where her pulse fluttered weak and rapid. The cellar door was half buried under wind-blown sand. Jacob kicked it clear, shouldered it open. Darkness and cool air rushed out, smelling of earth and preserved vegetables. He carried her down the rough steps, ducking beneath the low ceiling, 8 feet by 6 feet, shelves of canned goods along one wall, water barrel in the corner, A narrow bench he'd built for sorting potatoes. Jacob laid Morning Star on the bench, her legs hanging off the end. In the dim light filtering through the door, her skin looked gray. He lit the kerosene lantern hanging from a beam. Yellow light showed the full damage, 3 deep puncture wounds, defensive cuts on both forearms, bruising around her throat where someone had tried to strangle her. The kind of systematic violence that came from rage, not robbery. Water first. Jacob pulled his knife, cut away the blood-stiff bandages. Morning Star moaned but didn't wake. Fresh blood welled immediately. He poured water from the barrel directly onto the wounds, watching dirt and dried blood wash away. The deepest puncture, just below her ribs, went in at an angle, still bleeding steady. "Need to stop that," he said aloud. The sound of his own voice felt necessary suddenly, something to fill the pressing silence. Morning Star's eyes opened, not all the way, just slits of awareness. Her lips moved. "Creosote," she whispered. Jacob leaned closer. "What yellow?" "Flowers. Outside." Her hand lifted, trembled, fell back. "Stops. Blood." He knew the bush she meant. Grew wild all over the canyon, smelled like rain when you crushed the leaves. Jacob had seen Apache use it, but never learned how. How much? Handful. Leaves? Chew? She swallowed, winced. "Pack in." Jacob climbed back into the blazing daylight. The creosote grew thick near the burned cabin, untouched by the fire. He grabbed handful after handful of the small, resinous leaves, stuffed them in his pockets. The yellow flowers she'd mentioned were past bloom, but seed pods hung heavy on the branches. Back in the cellar, Morning Star had pulled herself partially upright against the wall. Her eyes tracked his movement, more alert now. "Chew," she said. Jacob put a handful of leaves in his mouth. The taste hit immediately bitter, medicinal, coating his tongue with resin. He chewed until it formed a paste, fighting the urge to spit. Morning Star pointed to her wounds. Jacob hesitated. "Now," she said. "Before. Too much blood." He leaned over her, spat the green-black paste directly onto the deepest puncture. She gasped, fingers clawing at the bench. He chewed more leaves, packed the paste into the other wounds. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. The creosote formed a kind of seal over the torn flesh. "Good," Morning Star breathed. "Now, willow bark. For fever. Don't have any. But water. Always." She tried to sit up straighter, failed. White trunk, narrow leaves. Jacob knew those trees too. A cluster grew where the spring fed into the canyon creek, 1/4 mile down the trail. He looked at Morning Star, uncertain about leaving her. "Go," she said. Wait." The walk to the creek took longer than it should have. Jacob kept looking back, expecting to see more riders, more trouble. The willows stood pale against the red rocks, their bark papery and peeling. He stripped long sections, rolled them into bundles. When he returned, Morning Star had managed to pull herself fully upright. She'd found his knife, was using it to cut strips from her underskirt. "Boil water," she said. "Bark in. 10 minutes, then drink." Jacob had no fire, no pot. Everything burned with the cabin. He looked at the supplies on the shelves. Canned peaches, preserved meat, pickled vegetables. No way to heat anything. "Sun," Morning Star said, seeing his problem. "Black metal. In sun. Gets hot." There was an old Dutch oven on the top shelf. Cast iron and heavy. Jacob filled it with water from the barrel, added the willow bark, carried it outside. The noon sun beat down merciless. He set the pot on a flat rock, watched the black metal start to heat, not boiling but hot enough. After 20 minutes, the water had turned brown, bitter smelling. He carried it back down. Morning Star drank it all without stopping, though her hands shook so bad he had to hold the pot steady. Color came back to her cheeks almost immediately. Not healthy color, but better than gray. "You're a healer," Jacob said. She almost smiled. "My grandmother taught." A pause to breathe. "Before missionaries came." "Mary taught at that school?" "Yes." Morning Star's eyes found his. "She taught letters. I taught her this." She gestured weakly at the herbal paste on her wounds. "Fair trade." Jacob sat on the floor across from her, back against the cool earth wall. In the lantern light, he could see Mary's influence in Morning Star's carefully mended dress, the small wooden cross on a leather cord around her neck. But underneath was something older, deeper, the knowledge of desert medicine, survival skills passed down through generations. "Why did Garrett come after you?" Morning Star's jaw tightened. "He wanted things. I would not." She stopped, looked away. "So I took his horse, ran. Morrison said Garrett had his pants down when you stabbed him." "Not stabbed." Her voice went hard. "Pushed. He fell on his own knife. Trying to—" Another pause. "Mary said you would understand about fighting." Jacob's hands clenched involuntarily. "Yeah." He understood about fighting, about the things people did to each other when they thought no one was watching. "The letters," he said. "Morrison said Mary left more." Morning Star nodded. "She knew things would happen." Her eyes started to close. "Saw it. In dreams. That's not possible. Many things not possible." Her words slurred, the willow bark and exhaustion pulling her under, but still happened. She slumped sideways. Jacob caught her before she fell off the bench, eased her down flat. Her breathing had steadied, deeper now. The creosote paste had formed a dark crust over her wounds, sealing them. He spread his coat over her, though the cellar wasn't cold, sat back against the wall to watch her sleep. The lantern flame flickered, throwing shadows across her face. In rest, she looked younger, maybe 20. 22 at most. Too young to know the kind of medicine she knew. Too young to have already learned to fight off men like Garrett. The afternoon stretched long. Jacob dozed, sitting up, jerked awake each time Morning Star moved or moaned. The willow bark tea had broken her fever, but infection could still set in. 3 days until Morrison returned with a real doctor. She had to last 3 days. Near sunset, she woke again. Clearer this time, eyes focusing properly. "Water?" she said. Jacob helped her drink, one hand supporting her neck. When she finished, she stayed half upright, studying his face. "You were soldier." Not a question. Jacob nodded anyway. "Mary said you came back different." "We all came back different." "No." Morning Star shook her head slightly. "You came back empty." She worried. Jacob set down the water cup harder than necessary. "Mary's dead. Her worries don't matter now. Dead people's worries matter most." Morning Star touched the wooden cross at her throat. "They see more clear." "That's Apache talk or missionary talk, both." She almost smiled again. Mary understood. Both ways. The seeing? Jacob wanted to argue, but something stopped him. The way Mary's letters had predicted this. The way she'd known Morning Star would need help exactly now. The way she'd drawn them together from beyond the grave. "There's food," he said instead. "Canned peaches. Preserved meat." Morning Star shook her head. "Not yet." "Stomach, too." She gestured vaguely. "Tomorrow." She closed her eyes again, but it didn't sleep. Jacob could tell by her breathing, the way her fingers moved restlessly against the coat. After a while, she spoke without opening her eyes. "The others will come." "Morrison arrested them." "No." Her eyes opened, dark and certain. "Others? From Trading Post? Garrett had friends?" Jacob felt ice form in his stomach, of course. Men like Garrett always had friends. Men who'd want payback for his death, justified or not. How many? Oh, 4. Maybe 5. Morning Star tried to sit up, managed it on the second try. "They know. I came this direction." "When?" She looked toward the cellar door, where evening light slanted red across the steps. "Soon? Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow." Jacob checked the Winchester's action, counted his remaining ammunition. 43 rounds against 5 men in a root cellar with 1 entrance and no windows. "We need to move," he said. "Cannot." Morning Star touched her bandaged ribs. "Cannot ride? Cannot walk for—" I saw she was right. Moving her now might tear everything open again. But staying meant fighting a battle they couldn't win, not trapped underground like this. That's when he heard it, felt it really, through the packed earth floor. Horses, multiple horses, moving steady up the canyon trail, coming with a dying light. When visibility would favor the attackers, Morning Star heard it too. Her hand found his wrist, gripped tight. "They bring dogs," she whispered. "Garrett's hunting dogs. They will find blood trail." The dogs came first, not barking yet, just the sound of their breathing and claws scrambling over rocks. Jacob pulled the cellar door shut, dropped the bar across it. The thick oak might hold for a while, but not forever. "Lantern," Morning Star whispered. Jacob killed the flame. Darkness pressed in complete, the kind of black that made you doubt your own existence. He felt along the wall until his hand found the Winchester, then moved to the door. Through the gap at the bottom, fading red light leaked in. The horses stopped maybe 30 yards out. Jacob counted the sounds. 5 mounts, restless, blowing hard from the climb. Leather creaked as riders dismounted. Boots hit dirt. Blood goes this way. A voice Jacob didn't recognize, older, gravelly. "Dogs got the sit strung." The scratching came at the door, claws on wood, then snuffling along the bottom gap. A dog whined, excited. More joined it. The door shuddered as they jumped against it. "Found something. Mr. Walsh?" Walsh. Jacob knew that name ran the freight company out of Tucson, had contracts with Garrett's Trading Post. Made sense they'd ride together. "Well," Walsh's voice carried authority. "Used to being obeyed. What's down there? Root cellar, looks like. Doors barred from inside." Footsteps approached. Stopped just outside. Jacob pressed the Winchester's barrel against the door at chest height. If they'd tried to force it, the first man through would take a bullet center mass. "Anyone in there?" Walsh called out. "We're looking for an Apache woman. Murdered Tom Garrett 2 nights back. There's law with us." Jacob said nothing. Beside him in the dark, Morning Star's breathing quickened. Her hand found his arm, squeezed once. "Stay quiet." "We tracked her blood here," Walsh continued. "No, she's hurt bad. Just send her out. Nobody else needs to get involved." The dogs kept scratching, whining. One started howling, setting off the others. The sound echoed off the canyon walls. mournful and hungry. "Check around back," Walsh ordered. "Might be another entrance." Boots moving away. Jacob knew there was no back entrance, but they'd look anyway. He reached out in the dark, found Morning Star's shoulder. She was sitting up, trembling but silent. "Your cabin burned down," Walsh said conversationally. "Still smoking. Shame about that. Man loses his home, might be grateful for some help rebuilding. $500 would go a long way toward new lumber." 500, more than most men saw in a year. Blood money for a woman they'd hunt down and kill, probably after doing worse. "Timer, check if there's oil in that shed." More footsteps. Jacob remembered the tool shed 20 feet south, half collapsed but still standing. He kept lamp oil there, turpentine for treating wood. They'd find it. Morning Star moved in the darkness. Her hand brushed past him, found the door. She was feeling for the bar, trying to lift it. Jacob caught her wrist. She pulled against his grip, surprisingly strong for someone who'd lost so much blood. "No," he whispered, barely a breath. She leaned close. He felt her lips against his ear. "They burn us out. Smoke comes in. We die anyway." She was right. This cellar had no ventilation except the door gap. Smoke would pour in, fill the small space in minutes. They'd suffocate or be forced out into the guns. Found it. Timer's voice, younger, excited. 2 cans of oil and some turpentine. "Pour it on the door," Walsh ordered. "Let's end this quick." Liquid splashed against wood. The sharp stink of turpentine leaked through the gaps. Jacob's eyes watered. Morning Star pulled harder against his grip, desperate now. "Wait," another voice said. "That's Jacob Weaver's place, ain't it?" "So, he was at Antietam, 20th Georgia. My cousin served with him." "I don't give a damn if he served with General Lee himself," Walsh said. "He's harboring a murderess." Tom Garrett weren't no saint. The new voice continued. "Everybody knew what he did to Indian women at that trading post. You going soft on me, Parsons? Just saying. Maybe we ought to verify she's actually in there before we burn out a war veteran." Silence except for the dogs. Jacob felt Morning Star stop pulling, her body tense as wire beside him. "Weaver," Walsh called out. "That you in there? This is Sam Walsh from Tucson Freight. We met once at Butterfield's. You were buying supplies." Jacob remembered. 2 years back, maybe 3. Walsh had tried to overcharge him for flour, backed down when Jacob caught the error. A cheat, but a careful one. "I know you're listening," Walsh continued. "Here's the thing, Garrett's dead. And somebody's got to pay. The Apache woman's already dying from what I can see of this blood trail. Why lose your life over someone who'll be dead by morning, anyway?" A match scraped. Jacob smelled sulfur. "I'm lighting this oil in 10 seconds, Walsh said, "unless you got something to say." Morning Star's hand found Jacob's face in the dark. Her fingers traced the scar along his jaw, the one from Antietam, where shrapnel had torn him open. She was saying goodbye. 5 seconds. Jacob thought about Mary, about her letter, saying he needed to learn to live again, about promises made and broken, about all the ways a man could fail. 3. His finger found the Winchester's trigger. 2. "She's with child," Jacob said through the door. The words hung in the air. Morning Star went rigid beside him. Her hand dropped from his face. "Bullshit," Walsh said, but uncertainty colored his voice. 3 months along, Jacob continued. "Maybe 4. You burn her out. You're killing a baby hasn't even drawn breath yet. Apache babies aren't." The father was white. Jacob felt Morning Star's sharp intake of breath. "Garrett forced himself on her for months. That's his baby you're about to murder." Murmuring among the men, the dogs had gone quiet, sensing the change in tension. "She's lying," Walsh said, but his voice had lost conviction. "Check Garrett's books," Jacob said. "She was working off a debt at his trading post. Ask anybody who traded there what kind of work he made the Apache women do. Ask why his wife left him last year." "Christ," Parsons muttered. "I heard stories." "Stories don't mean nothing," Walsh snapped. But he didn't light the oil. "You want her for murder," Jacob said. "Fine. But she gets a trial, a real trial, in Tucson, with a judge, not burned alive in a cellar like an animal. Trials are for white folks," Timer said. "Trials are for anybody Marshal Morrison brings in," Jacob countered. "And he's already been here, arrested the men who burned my cabin. He'll be back in 3 days. That caused another stir. Morrison's name carried weight. Federal marshal with a reputation for playing straight, no matter who was involved. "You're lying, dear," Walsh said, but he sounded less sure. "Check the ground by the burned cabin. 3 different bloodstains from where Morrison shot those boys. Check the hoof prints. His horse has a bar shoe on the left front. Distinctive mark." Silence. Then footsteps moving away. Walsh sending someone to verify. Jacob waited, counting his own heartbeats. Beside him, Morning Star hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound since his lie about pregnancy. "It's true," Timer called from the distance. "Bar shoe track, clear as day, and blood on the ground." Walsh cursed, long and creative. The dogs started whining again, picking up their master's agitation. "Morrison's got no jurisdiction over this," Walsh said finally. "Murder on Indian land," Jacob said. "That's federal. You know it, I know it. You burn us out now. Morrison will track every one of you down." More murmuring, an argument breaking out among the men. Jacob caught fragments. "Not worth it," and "should have stayed in Tucson," and "Garrett was asking for it anyway." "We wait," Walsh decided. "Post a guard. If Morrison doesn't show in 3 days, we burn them out. If he does show, we make our case proper." "You're just going to leave them down there?" Timer asked. "They can't go nowhere. 1 door, no windows. We got food, water, time. They don't." Footsteps retreating, the horses moving but not far. They were making camp, probably by the burned cabin where they could watch the cellar door. Jacob heard the clink of metal, smelled smoke as they built a cook fire. The dogs settled, occasional whines and shuffles as they bedded down. They'd posted a guard like Walsh said. Jacob could hear him walking back and forth, boots regular as a clock. In the darkness, Morning Star moved, slow, careful, pulling away from him. He heard her feeling along the wall, moving toward the back corner. "There's no other way out," he whispered. She didn't answer. Just kept moving, searching for something in the black. Then a sound. He recognized her knife, the one she'd used to cut bandages, scraping against packed earth. She was digging. "The walls are reinforced," he said. "Timber frame, 2 feet of earth between. You'll never—" "Not out," she whispered back. "Under." Jacob moved toward her voice, hand outstretched, until he found her shoulder. She was on her knees, stabbing the knife into the floor. "What are you—" "Root cellar," she said. "Built over old storage pit, Apache storage pit." His hand found the floor where she was working. The earth was different here, looser, not the hard-packed clay of the rest of the floor, but filled dirt. Someone had filled in something underneath. "How do you know?" "Grandmother's sister lived here before soldiers came." She gasped, stopped digging, breathing hard. 40 years ago, maybe more. The knife scraped, hit something hard, wood, old wood, by the sound when she tapped it. They cached food, weapons, for winter. Another gasp of pain, covered with wood, then dirt. Jacob took the knife from her shaking hand, continued digging. The board blade hit timber repeatedly, outlining what felt like a wooden cover maybe 3 feet square. His great-grandmother had built something similar in their root cellar back in South Carolina, though that had been for hiding valuables during the Revolution. If this opens onto a tunnel, not tunnel, Morning Star said, just deep hole. But maybe it connected to something else. Maybe it held supply they could use. Maybe it was just a hole they could die in together instead of separately. The guard's footsteps continued outside. The fire crackled. One of the dogs barked at something in the darkness. Coyote, probably then settled. Jacob kept digging, clearing dirt from around the wooden cover. His fingers found an edge, pried up. The wood was old, dry-rotted in places, but solid enough. He pulled harder. The board lifted with a soft crack that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Jacob froze, listening. The guard's footsteps didn't change pace. Stale air rushed up from below, carrying the scent of old leather, dried corn, and something else, something metal. Morning Star made a small sound. Her hand found his in the dark, guided it down into the hole. His fingers touched cloth, then leather, then gun oil. His fingers found the familiar shape of a rifle barrel, then another and another. Grandmother said they hid them. When soldiers ordered, all weapons turned in. Jacob felt deeper. Boxes of what felt like ammunition, more rifles, maybe Spencer repeaters, by the action, 40-year-old weapons. But if the oil smell meant anything, they'd been maintained. How many, he whispered, don't know. But she didn't finish, didn't need to. Even a few working rifles changed everything. Walsh's men thought they had 2 people trapped with 1 Winchester. They wouldn't expect a firefight. Can you shoot? Jacob asked. Morning Star's hand tightened on his. Mary taught me. Of course she had. Mary would have insisted any woman alone know how to defend herself. Even at the missionary school, even against regulations, she would have found a way. We wait, Jacob said. Let them think we're helpless. Then a new sound cut him off. Horses approaching from the south, but not the canyon trail across country, picking their way through the rocks. The guard heard it too. His footsteps stopped. Walsh, he called. Riders coming? The new horses picked their way closer, iron shoes striking sparks off granite. 3 riders, maybe 4. Moving careful, but not trying to hide their approach. Who goes there? Walsh's voice carried sharp across the darkness. No answer. The horses kept coming. Jacob pressed his eye to the gap under the door. Cook firelight showed Walsh's men scrambling for positions, one behind the water trough, another flat against the burned cabin's remaining wall. Timer had his rifle up, aimed toward the approaching sounds. Federal Marshal, a voice called out, not Morrison Younger, with a Spanish accent. Looking for Sam Walsh? That's me. What's your business? Got a message from Marshal Morrison. The rider came into firelight view. Mexican, early 20s, wearing a deputy's star. 2 other riders flanked him, hanging back in shadows. Morrison sent you? Walsh sounded skeptical. Said to tell you the murder charge against the Apache woman is dropped. Tom Garrett's death been ruled self-defense. The hell it has. The deputy dismounted, pulled the papers from his coat. Sworn statements from 3 witnesses at the trading post. Garrett attacked her with a knife. She defended herself. He fell on his own blade. Walsh snatched the papers, held them to the firelight. His jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. These witnesses, they Apache. 2 white men and Garrett's own wife, the deputy said. She came forward after she heard he was dead, told Morrison everything. what her husband did to Indian women, what he had tried to do that night. This is horseshit. This is law. The deputy's voice hardened. Morrison says you got 1 hour to clear out. After that, anybody still here gets arrested for attempted murder. We ain't attempted nothing. Oil on that cellar door says different. Jacob felt Morningstar's hand on his back. She'd crawled over, was listening at the gap beside him. Her breathing quickened at the deputy's words. Even if this is legal, Walsh said, that woman stole Garrett's horse, which Morrison already recovered and returned to Mrs. Garrett, who doesn't want to press charges. The deputy remounted. 1 hour. Mr. Walsh, you can't just... Morrison's got 6 more deputies riding up from Tucson. They'll be here by dawn. You want to explain to them why you're trying to burn 2 people alive. The deputy wheeled his horse, started back the way he'd come. His companions followed without having said a word. Walsh cursed, crumpled the papers. Parsons' check, if that's really a federal deputy. Now, ride after him. See where he goes. Parsons mounted up, spurred off into the darkness. The other men gathered around Walsh, voices low and angry. Jacob caught fragments. Can't trust Mexicans, and Morrison's getting soft, and should do it anyway. Timer, Walsh said finally. You still got family in the Rangers. My brother's unit is at Fort Huachuca. How long to ride there and be back with help? Day and a half, maybe 2. Do it. Tell them we got Apache raiders. Murdered a white man. Don't mention Morrison. Timer's boots moved away fast, a horse galloping off, south toward the fort. Jacob's stomach tightened. Rangers wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't care about legal papers. They'd shoot first, sort it out after. What about Morrison's deputies? One of the men asked. That Mexican was lying, Walsh said. No way Morrison got word to Tucson and back this fast. We got time. Footsteps approached the cellar door. Walsh's voice came close. Hear all that, Weaver? Your federal protection is make-believe. Just a Mexican with a stolen badge trying to help his Apache friends. Jacob said nothing. Beside him, Morningstar's breathing had gone shallow. Scared. Here's what's going to happen, Tibet, Walsh continued. Timer brings back real law. Rangers who know how to deal with Apache murderers. Meanwhile, we wait. No food or water goes in that cellar till 3 days in this heat, you'll be begging to come out. Or, Walsh added, you could send her out now. Save yourself the suffering. Morningstar's fingers dug into Jacob's arm. He reached back, covered her hand with his. Go to hell, Walsh, Jacob said. Your choice. Footsteps retreating, Jacob heard them settling back around their fire, posting watches. 2 men awake at all times. From the sound of it, the dogs curled up near the warmth, occasional snuffles and whines as they slept. Morningstar pulled him away from the door, deeper into the cellar. Her mouth found his ear. Rangers come. They kill us both. She was right. Rangers had a reputation for shooting first, especially with Apache. And Jacob harboring her would make him fair game too. The rifles, he whispered back. They felt their way to the hidden cache. Jacob lifted out the first rifle, definitely a Spencer. The weight and balance familiar, even after 40 years. The action worked smooth when he tested it. Somebody had maintained these well. Morningstar found the ammunition boxes, brass cartridges, wrapped in oiled cloth. They loaded by feel in the absolute darkness, fingers finding the familiar shapes. Jacob counted 5 rifles total, maybe 200 rounds. Can you really shoot? He asked. Her hand found his face, traced down to his shoulder, then guided his hand to her hip. Through the fabric, he felt a scar, old and puckered. Soldiers. Came to school, her voice barely a whisper. Mary taught us hide and shoot back. I was 12. Christ, 12 years old, fighting off soldiers. No wonder Mary had taken special interest in her. They arranged the rifles along the wall, ammunition within easy reach. The cellar was defensible, one entrance. Thick walls, good cover, but no water except what was in the barrel, maybe 2 gallons. No food except what was on the shelves. And no way out except through men who'd shoot on sight. We could wait for Morrison, Morningstar said. He won't be back for 2 more days. Rangers will be here first. Then we fight. Jacob checked the Spencer's action again. Smooth, ready. In the dark, he could almost pretend he was back in Georgia. That night before Antietam, when they'd all thought one more battle would end it, when he'd still believed fighting solved things. Jacob, Morningstar's voice pulled him back. We fight, he said. They worked through the night, preparing, moving supplies to create cover positions, loading every rifle. Morningstar's wounds had started seeping again. Jacob could smell the blood, but she didn't complain. They communicated in touches and whispers, learning each other's movement patterns in the dark. Near dawn, gray light started leaking under the door. Jacob heard the guard change, fresh voices replacing tired ones, coffee brewing, bacon frying. His stomach clenched with hunger, but worse was the thirst. They'd shared the last of the water an hour ago. Morningstar pressed against his side, shivering despite the warmth. Fever, maybe, or blood loss catching up. Her breathing had gone ragged. Rest, he said. Can't. They could come. I'll watch. She leaned into him, her weight slight as a child's. Mary was right. About what? You, good man, just lost. Her voice faded. Jacob felt her go limp, caught her before she fell. Pulse still there, but weak. The creosote seal on her wounds had broken, fresh blood soaked through her dress. Footsteps outside, multiple men moving. Jacob laid Morningstar carefully in the corner, grabbed the Spencer. Through the door gap, he saw Walsh's men forming up, weapons ready. But they weren't looking at the cellar. They faced south, toward the canyon mouth. Dust cloud rising, lots of horses coming fast. Too soon for rangers from Fort Huachuca. Wrong direction anyway. That's not Morrison, Walsh said. Too many riders. The dust cloud grew. Jacob counted at least 12 horses, maybe more. They weren't trying for stealth, coming straight up the canyon at full gallop. The lead rider came into view, Apache warrior, painted for war, rifle raised. Behind him, more warriors spread out in attack formation. Apache, Timer screamed. It's a raid. Gunfire erupted. Walsh's men scattered for cover, shooting wild. The Apache riders split into 2 groups. Flanking the burned cabin, their war cries echoed off canyon walls, mixed with the screams of horses and men. Morningstar stirred, eyes opening. She heard the sounds, understood immediately. My people, she whispered, they came for me. But something was wrong. Jacob knew Apache tactics, had fought against them before. This attack was too direct, too costly. They were sacrificing warriors for speed, not trying to win, but trying to reach the cellar, he said. They're coming for the cellar. 3 warriors broke through Walsh's line, riding straight for them. Bullets chased them, one rider falling, his horse screaming. The other 2 reached the door, threw themselves off their mounts. Something heavy slammed against the wood, an axe. They were trying to break in. Get back, Jacob told Morningstar, raising the Spencer. The door splintered. Daylight poured through the crack. An Apache face appeared, young warrior wild with battle fury. His eyes found Morningstar, widened with recognition. He shouted something in Apache. She responded, weak but urgent. The warrior's expression changed from fury to horror. He looked at Jacob, at the rifle pointed at his chest, at Morning Star bleeding in the corner. More Apache words, fast and desperate, Morning Star trying to explain. The warrior shook his head, raised his own rifle toward Jacob. That's when Jacob saw it. The warrior's rifle, a new Winchester 80, military issue, probably taken from dead soldiers. But the stock bore carved initials T.G. Tom Garrett's rifle. These weren't rescuers. They were Garrett's other partners. The Apache warrior's rifle barrel pressed cold against Jacob's forehead. Behind him, the battle raged gunfire. Screaming horses, Walsh's men shouting contradictory orders. Morning Star spoke rapid Apache, her voice cracking with urgency. The warrior's finger tensed on the trigger. Jacob could see the decision forming in his eyes. Kill the white man. Take the woman. Finish what Garrett started. Taza, Morning Star said in English, this man protects me. Taza. Jacob knew that name. Son of Cochise, trying to follow his father's peace path but pushed toward war by younger warriors, the rifle didn't waver. Morning Star dragged herself forward, leaving a blood smear across the dirt floor. She reached Taza's leg, spoke again in Apache. Jacob caught a few words he recognized: friend, sister, Mary. Taza's eyes flicked to her, saw the blood-soaked bandages, the fever-bright eyes. His rifle dropped an inch. A bullet punched through the doorframe, showering them with splinters. Taza spun, fired back through the opening. One of Walsh's men screamed, "Inside!" Taza commanded in accented English. He pushed past Jacob, grabbed Morning Star under the arms. "We go!" "She can't ride," Jacob said. "She's bleeding out." Taza's hands found her wounds, came away red. His face changed, real fear replacing warrior fury. More Apache riders reached the cellar. They dismounted, using their horses as shields against Walsh's fire. One warrior older, with gray streaking his hair, looked through the ruined door. His eyes went straight to Garrett's rifle in Taza's hands. He spoke sharp Apache. Taza responded, defensive. The older warrior pointed at Morning Star, at her wounds, speaking faster. An argument. Jacob understood without knowing the words they were fighting about whether to take her or leave her. A horse screamed outside. Through the doorway, Jacob saw it go down, legs thrashing. Its rider rolled clear, took a bullet in the shoulder, crawled behind the water trough. "They're flanking us!" someone shouted. Walsh's men were regrouping, organizing crossfire on the cellar entrance. The older warrior grabbed Taza's arm, pulled him toward the door. Taza resisted, gestured at Morning Star. More argument. Time running out. Jacob could hear Walsh organizing his men for a concentrated assault. "Listen," Jacob said. Both Apache turned to him, weapons rising. "There's another way." Jacob pointed to the hidden cache in the floor. "Old storage pit. Your people's from 40 years ago." The older warrior's eyes narrowed. He pushed past Jacob, looked into the hole. Saw the rifles, the ammunition. His hand went to a leather pouch at his belt, pulled out an old photograph. Tintype, edges worn from handling. The image showed a young Apache woman standing beside this very cellar when it was newly built. The woman looked exactly like Morning Star. "Grandmother," Morning Star whispered, "her sister." The warrior nodded, spoke rapid Apache to Taza, who started pulling the cached rifles out, passing them to other warriors, crowding the entrance. "No," Jacob said, "not for killing, for escape." They ignored him, armed themselves with dispensers, checking actions with practiced efficiency. These weren't reservation Apache, these were fighters who'd never surrendered, still carrying on the old war. Morning Star tried to sit up, failed. "Taza, please." He knelt beside her, touched her face with unexpected gentleness, spoke soft Apache. She shook her head, pointed at Jacob. "He saved me." "Don't." A volley of gunfire shattered the morning. Walsh's men charging. Trying to retake initiative, bullets chewed through the doorframe, whined off stone walls. An Apache warrior grunted, clutched his ribs, kept shooting. Jacob grabbed Morning Star, pulled her deeper into the cellar, pressed his body over hers as bullets sparked off the walls. She was shaking, fever or fear or both. "Jacob," her hand found his face. "I'm sorry. Brought this." "Not your fault, Garrett. Sold guns to Taza's band. They think I stole." Another piece clicking into place. Garrett had been running guns to hostile Apache, probably skimming profits from both sides. Morning Star had stumbled into the middle of it, become everyone's target. The gunfire intensified. Through the smoke and dust, Jacob saw an Apache warrior fall across the threshold, still moving, trying to crawl clear. Walsh's men pressed closer, emboldened by their advantage in cover. Taza stood in the doorway, firing measured shots with Garrett's Winchester. Blood ran down his arm from a graze. The older warrior beside him fed him ammunition. Both of them exposed, standing their ground. They were going to die, all of them. Walsh's men would overrun the cellar, kill everyone inside, call it an Apache raid gone bad. Morrison would find only bodies, no witnesses to contradict the story. Jacob looked at the Spencers lined against the wall, at Morning Star, barely conscious, at the Apache warriors fighting a battle they couldn't win. "Mary said you'd fight it," Morning Star had whispered yesterday. Fight what? Not the men outside. Something else. Something inside himself. He picked up a Spencer, checked the load, stood up. "What are you doing?" Morning Star grabbed his shirt. "Ending this?" Jacob pushed past Taza to the doorway, stepped out into the morning light, rifle raised but not aimed. The sun hadn't crested the canyon wall yet, everything still painted in gray pre-dawn shadows. "Walsh?" His voice carried over the gunfire. The shooting stuttered, slowed. Walsh, visible behind the overturned water trough. Rifle trained on Jacob. "Come to your senses. Weaver. Nobody else needs to die. Tell that to your Apache friends. They started this." "No." Jacob took another step forward. "Garrett started this. Running guns, hurting women, stealing from everyone. It ends now." Movement to his left timer, rifle aimed at his head. To his right, Parsons behind the burned timber pile. Crossfire position. One wrong word and they'd cut him down. Behind him, Taza stepped out. Blood painted his left arm, but his rifle held steady. The older warrior followed, then two more, not attacking, not retreating, standing. "This is your last chance," Walsh said. "Send out the woman." "The woman is dying," Jacob said. "Lost too much blood. She'll be gone within the hour." Not true, maybe. But Walsh didn't know that. Jacob kept talking. "You want justice for Garrett. It's done. She's paid. These warriors, they were his partners. He cheated them like he cheated everyone. Let them go. Let all of us go. They killed my men. Your men attacked them. Defense isn't murder." Jacob felt Morning Star behind him, turned to see her dragging herself through the doorway, using the frame to pull herself upright. Blood ran fresh down her dress, but her chin lifted high. She spoke. Not English, not Apache, Latin. The Lord's Prayer. Learned at Mary's missionary school. Her voice cracked, faltered, continued. One of Walsh's men, the one who'd mentioned his cousin serving with Jacob, lowered his rifle. "Mr. Walsh," he said, "she's praying. So maybe we ought to—" "Shut up, Parsons." But Parsons stepped out from cover, walked toward them, rifle pointed at the ground, stopped halfway between the two groups. "My cousin wrote me about Antietam," he said to Jacob. Said you carried 3 wounded men to safety. Said you went back into artillery fire for them. Jacob's throat tightened. He didn't remember their faces, just the weight of them, the blood, the screaming. That's got nothing to do with— It's got everything to do with it. Parsons interrupted Walsh. This man earned better than being burned out of his home. He looked at the Apache warriors. And maybe these people earned better than being hunted for defending themselves. The sun broke the canyon rim. Light poured gold across the rocks, painted everything in fire colors. Jacob saw it all clear. Walsh's men exhausted and scared. The Apache warriors ready to die fighting. Morning Star swaying but standing. Blood drops catching light like rubies. "Timer!" Walsh called. "You with me?" Timer looked at the dead horses, the wounded men, the woman praying in Latin while bleeding out. His rifle lowered. "I'm done, Mr. Walsh. This ain't what I signed up for." "You yellow bastards!" Walsh stood up from behind the trough, aimed his rifle at Morning Star. "If nobody else will finish this—" Taza moved, not shooting, just stepping between Walsh and Morning Star. The older warrior joined him, then the other Apache, then Parsons, then Tamil. A wall of men between Walsh and his target. Jacob stepped forward too, but Morning Star caught his arm, leaned against him, her weight nothing. "No more," she whispered. "Enough." Walsh's rifle tracked across them all, his finger on the trigger, tension in his shoulders. Jacob could see him calculating how many he could kill before they got him. That's when they heard it. Horses, lots of them, coming up the canyon trail fast. "That'll be the Rangers," Walsh said, but uncertain now. The lead rider came into view. Federal Marshal Starr caught the morning light. Morrison, as promised. Behind him, 6 deputies, all armed. Walsh lowered his rifle, spat in the dust. Morrison surveyed the scene. Dead horses, wounded men, Apache warriors armed with 40-year-old Spencers, Morning Star bleeding. Everyone frozen in that moment before violence. He dismounted slow, hand on his pistol, but not drawing, walked through the battlefield like a man walking through church. Stopped in front of Morning Star. "Anna," he said, "Mary sent another letter." He pulled an envelope from his coat, handed it to her with careful reverence. She took it with shaking fingers, unopened. Morrison turned to Walsh. "You're under arrest. For what? Attempted murder, arson, conspiracy?" Morrison nodded to his deputies, who moved to flank Walsh. "We've been watching since last night. Saw everything last night, but the Mexican deputy said that was my deputy, testing whether you'd honor the law." Morrison's face could have been carved from stone. "You failed." Walsh dropped his rifle. The deputies moved in, taking weapons, binding hands. His men didn't resist defeat written in their shoulders, their exhausted faces. Morrison turned to Taza, spoke in Apache. Taza responded, gestured at Morning Star, an explanation, maybe an apology. Morrison nodded. "Take your wounded and go," he said in English. "No charges if you leave now." The Apache warriors looked at Morning Star. She nodded, spoke soft Apache, a goodbye. Taza touched her face once, gentle, then helped his wounded onto horses. They rode out without looking back, shadows disappearing into the canyon. Morrison looked at Jacob. "You need a doctor." "Not for me, for her. Already sent a man to Benson. Doc should be here within 2 hours." Morrison studied the burned cabin, the cellar, the blood everywhere. Hell of a thing. "Yeah." Morning Star's knees buckled. Jacob caught her, lifted her, weighed nothing now, bird bones and spirit, but still breathing, still holding Mary's letter. "Get her inside," Morrison said. "What's left of inside?" Jacob carried her to the cellar, laid her on the bench. In the morning light streaming through the broken door, He could see how bad it was, how much blood she'd lost, how little time remained. She lifted the letter, hands too weak to open it. "You!" she whispered. Jacob took the envelope. His name on the front, Mary's handwriting inside, a single sheet. "My beloved Jacob, if you're reading this, then you have chosen to stand instead of hide. You have remembered the man I married, the one who runs toward trouble to help, not away to safety. Morning Star needed you, but you needed her more. You needed to remember that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about acting despite the fear. You will want to pull back now. Don't. She has traveled too far to reach you, and you have broken too much of yourself to rebuild alone. Trust what grows between you. Trust that I wanted this for you both. Until we meet again in God's time, you're Mary." When Jacob looked up, tears ran down Morning Star's face. But she was smiling. She knew. Morning Star whispered. Knew what? Morning Star's hand found his, squeezed with the last of her strength, that I would love you from the moment we met. Her eyes closed. Her breathing went shallow, barely there. The doctor was still an hour away. Morning Star's chest stopped moving. Jacob pressed his ear against her ribs. Nothing. Then the faintest flutter, like a bird's wing against glass. "Not yet," he said. "Not like this." He grabbed the water barrel, what little remained sloshing at the bottom, tore fabric from his shirt, soaked it, pressed it to her lips. A drop ran down her throat, then another. Morrison appeared in the doorway. "Doc's coming up the trail. 10 minutes, maybe." "She doesn't have 10 minutes." Morrison knelt beside them, felt for Morning Star's pulse. His face told Jacob what he already knew. "There's whiskey in my saddlebag," Morrison said. "Sometimes the shock—" "Get it." Morrison returned with the bottle. Jacob tipped Morning Star's head back, poured a thin stream between her lips. She choked. Coffee. Blood came up, but also air. Breathing again, ragged but real. "That's it," Jacob said. "Fly it." Her eyes open, unfocused, found his face. Her lips moved no sound, but he read the shape. "Stay. I'm here." The doctor arrived in a dust cloud, black bag banging against his horse's flank. Young man, younger than Jacob expected, but his hands moved sure and quick. He cut away the blood-stiff bandages, examined the wounds. "Sepsis setting in," he said, "and she's lost too much blood. So fix it. I can clean the wounds, stitch what's torn, but blood." He shook his head. "There's no fixing that." Jacob rolled up his sleeve. "Take mine. That's not how it works." "Then make it work." The doctor looked at Morrison, who shrugged. "Man wants to try, let him try." What followed was rough improvisation rubber tubing from the doctor's bag, needles meant for other purposes, Jacob's blood running dark through makeshift connections into Morning Star's arm. No way to know if it would help or harm. The doctor stitched while the transfer happened, his movements quick and worried. "Enough," he said after what felt like hours but was maybe 20 minutes. "Any more, and you'll pass out." Jacob's head spun when he sat up. Morning Star's color had changed, still pale, but not that gray death shade. Her breathing came steadier. "She needs a real hospital," the doctor said. "Tucson, maybe." "Can she travel?" "Not for days, maybe a week." Morrison had his men clear the battlefield, bodies wrapped and loaded, weapons collected. Walsh and his surviving men rode out in chains, deputies flanking them. The canyon grew quiet, except for wind through rocks and the crackle of the still smoldering cabin. Jacob sat beside Morning Star through the afternoon. She drifted in and out, sometimes conscious enough to squeeze his hand, mostly gone somewhere beyond reach. The doctor stayed, checking wounds, forcing water between her lips. Near sunset, she spoke. The letter. Jacob found it crumpled where it had fallen. Read it to her again. Mary's words about trust, about rebuilding, about what grows between broken people. She was wrong, Morning Star whispered. Jacob's chest tightened. About what? Not from. First moment. Morning Star's eyes found his. From. Before. In dreams, Mary showed me your face. The doctor snorted. Fever talk. But Jacob remembered his own dreams these past months. A woman's voice he didn't recognize, speaking words that he couldn't quite catch, always ending with him waking, reaching for something no longer there. Rest, he told Morning Star. Promise. You won't leave. Promise. She slept. Jacob dozed, sitting up, back against the cellar wall. The doctor kept watch, checking her temperature, her pulse, the slow seepage through bandages. 3 days passed that way. Morrison's men brought supplies, helped construct a shelter from salvaged timber and canvas. The doctor came and went, other patients to tend, but always returning. Morning Star improved by small measures, keeping water down, then broth, then solid food. On the 4th day, she sat up unassisted. I want to see, she said. Jacob helped her outside. The cabin was gone, just black timbers and ash. But the canyon remained red rocks catching morning light. The spring still running clear, eagles circling high above. We could rebuild, Jacob said. Here. Somewhere else, maybe. Start fresh. Morning Star leaned against him, still weak, but weight more substantial now. Mary's letters. Are there really more? Morrison had left them a box of envelopes, each dated weeks or months ahead. Jacob had been afraid to open them, afraid of what Mary might have seen or planned. We could read them, Morning Star said, or not. Choose our own way. You want to stay after everything. She was quiet long enough that Jacob thought she might not answer. Then I have nowhere else, no people who would take me back, but that's not why. She turned to face him. I choose to stay. Choose you. The words hung between them. Not love, not yet. That would come later, maybe, if they were lucky. But choice, that was something they could build on. 3 months later, Jacob set the final board in place on the new cabin's roof. Smaller than the original, but better built. Morrison had helped with supplies, even sent men to assist with the heavy work. The walls stood thick and true, windows facing east to catch morning sun. Below, Morning Star worked the garden, still moving careful, scars pulling when she bent, but strong enough. She'd insisted on planting despite the late-season corn, beans, squash in the old way her grandmother taught. The shoots came up fast in the monsoon rains, green against red earth. Letter came, she called up. Jacob climbed down. His hands had new calluses from building, good honest pain instead of the nothing he'd felt for 3 years. Morning Star handed him the envelope, not one of Mary's planned letters, but fresh correspondence. Morrison's handwriting inside. A legal document. Deed to the land. Official now. Plus surrounding acres the government had released. And a note, Mary's family sent this, said she'd want you to have it. There's also word about Apache citizenship papers. If Miss Morning Star wants to pursue that, change is coming, slow but sure. F.E. with the papers was a photograph, Mary on their wedding day, smiling, before the war took everything. But also another photo behind it, Mary and Morning Star at the mission school, standing with a group of Apache children, all smiling, all reaching toward something the camera couldn't capture. We should frame these, Morning Star said. Yeah. But they stood there a while first, looking at the faces of who they'd been, who they'd lost, who they were becoming. That evening, Otto arrived with his supply wagon, climbed down slow, taking in the new cabin, the garden, the changes. "Brought something," he said, reached into the wagon rush, pulled out a rocking chair, figured you might need it. The chair was old, worn smooth by use. Otto set it on the porch, gave it a test rock. "Was my mother's," he said. "Been sitting in storage. Thought maybe—" He gestured vaguely at Morning Star. She'd told Jacob a week ago, confirmed what he'd suspected from the rhythm of her sickness each morning. Not Garrett's child that had been a lie to save their lives, but something new, unexpected. Probably from that improvised blood transfer creating some connection neither understood. "Thank you," Morning Star said to Otto. He stayed for dinner. They ate outside, watching sunset paint the canyon walls, talked about rain, about crops, about nothing important. When Otto left, he paused at his wagon. "Going to tell folks in town," he said, "about you two. Some won't like it." "Let them not like it," Jacob said. "That's what I figured you'd say." After Otto's wagon disappeared down the trail, Jacob and Morning Star sat on the porch. She took the rocking chair, hands resting on her belly. Jacob sat on the steps, carving a piece of juniper into something that might become a toy. "Mary's next letter is dated tomorrow," Morning Star said. They'd been reading them one at a time. These messages from the grave, each one uncanny in its accuracy, as if Mary could see the future unfolding, or maybe she'd just known them both well enough to predict their choices. "We could skip it," Jacob said, "make our own way." "We could," but tomorrow they'd open it anyway, read Mary's words about hope, about building, about the child she somehow knew would come. They'd follow her guidance a little longer, until they felt strong enough to walk without it. The stars came out, brilliant in the clear desert air. Somewhere a coyote called, answered by another. The spring whispered over stones. Small sounds of life continuing. Morning Star reached down, touched Jacob's shoulder. He covered her hand with his. Not everything was healed, maybe never would be. But this sitting quiet together, building something from ruins, choosing to stay, this was enough. This was home. The first families arrived in spring, 2 wagons, Pennsylvania Dutch, looking for farmland. They stopped at Jacob and Morning Star's well, asking permission to water their oxen. Morning Star brought them cornbread. The youngest child, maybe 6, touched her belly where it rounded with promise. "Baby?" the girl asked. "Soon?" Morning Star said. The families stayed 3 days, helping Jacob expand the irrigation channels. The men worked slant, steady. The women shared preserving techniques with Morning Star, traded seeds. When they left to claim land downstream, the mother pressed a quilt into Morning Star's hands. For the little one, more came, Mexican farmers, former buffalo soldiers, Apache who'd left the reservation, each stopping for water, staying for conversation, building near enough to help but far enough for privacy. By summer's end, 5 homesteads dotted the canyon. They shared tools, labor, knowledge. When Morning Star's time came, 2 midwives attended at one Mexican, one Apache. When raiders threatened, everyone stood together. Otto expanded his route, bringing mail, newspapers, connection to the wider world, but the real connections grew here, in the Red Rock Canyon. People who'd chosen to build something new from broken pieces. Together. Disclaimer: this story was inspired by historical Western frontier narratives and created solely for entertainment purposes. It does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. All characters and events are products of the author's imagination, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. The story aims to explore themes of redemption, healing, and community building in the American West. While acknowledging the complex and often difficult history of this period, no endorsement of historical injustices or violence is intended or implied.